Chaim, Shimon, Yitzchak, Shaul, and Baruch. Among the people whose displeasure Chaim Shimon had incurred were the two elder sons-in-law of Eliezer Ruvain the smith. It was entirely different, however, with the third and youngest son-in-law, Yitzchak Shaul, at whose wedding Chaim Shimon was a noted guest. A firm and warm friendship had sprung up between them at their first meeting, for they had a mutual respect and admiration for each other's character. During Baruch's stay at the smith's house for Pesach, he had the opportunity of becoming acquainted with Chaim Shimon through Yitzchak Shaul. He then heard how when the latter had made his speech at his wedding, as was customary for bridegrooms, and everyone had greatly applauded, Chaim Shimon had risen and in his speech had said that while joining in the praise for the groom for his scholarly and excellent speech, he would warn him against allowing himself to become conceited because of his learning, either now or at any future date. For conceit was a terrible trait in man, and one should ever be on one's guard against falling a victim to it. Many of those present lowered their heads when they heard Chaim Shimon's outspoken words, obviously disapproving of such candor and thinking uncomfortably that the speaker was surely referring to them. But the groom's father, sitting next to the groom, bent forward and whispered in his ear, "My son, I like that young man. He is a fellow after my own heart. I'm sure he has a great future before him." The chassid within him told him that here was a potential follower of the new Hasidic teachings, which were about this time making themselves felt in the Jewish world. Teachings which were in contradiction with the line of thought as represented by the scholars present at the wedding. Yitzchak Shaul introduced Baruch to another young man named Chaim Elia, the son-in-law of a certain Zalman Fishel, the only son. Baruch learned all about Zalman Fishel. It appeared that in reality he was the 9th child of his parents, and his 8 other sisters and brothers were all living. The reason, however, for his very strange nickname was due to the fact that from his earliest childhood he had been extremely delicate. His parents were well aware of this and treated him as if he were the most delicate plant which the slightest puff of wind could blow away and destroy. Young as he was, he soon learned the advantages of accepting the role of a delicate child, and while his parents fussed over him so fondly, he fussed over himself even more. Right into manhood, he treated himself and saw to it that everyone else did likewise as a delicate and only child, and so his nickname stuck to him all his life. He never as much as dipped a finger in cold water, as the saying goes, and of course, he never did a stroke of what might be termed work. Until he got married, his father kept him, and after his marriage, his father-in-law kept him for 20 years. When the latter died and his source of income disappeared at the same time, he still did not attempt to do anything to support his wife and children, but left all the responsibility to his wife. Zalman Fishel might have become a scholar had he not been too lazy to even concentrate on his studies, and if ever he happened to pick up a Gemara, he quickly remembered some trifling task that he had simply had to attend to, and away went the Gemara. One could always be sure to find Zalman Fishel nibbling at something. It would either be a biscuit, piece of cake, sweetmeat, or fruit, for of course he was in the habit of assuring everybody he just had to eat something to keep up his strength, as he had a very weak heart. Another weakness of his, and this nobody could deny, was that he took every opportunity of davening before the Yamid. On Shabbos or Yom Tif, that was certainly understandable, but even an ordinary weekday was good enough to afford him his particular pleasure of acting as chazan. No sooner came the month of Av, 2 months before Rosh Hashanah, than Zalman Fishel began to take what he considered to be the necessary precautions in protecting his voice. He would walk about conspicuously with a rabbit skin scarf around his throat, and of course when Elul came, that was when he took himself and his voice very seriously indeed. He would drink endless cups of raw eggs beaten up with honey so that his voice should be smooth and sweet for the Yom Neiram. Whenever he davened before the Yamid, he would not content himself with merely hearing the immediate criticism of those present, but whenever he went, whomever he visited, he would invariably ask, "Well, how did you like my davening?" Or if it was someone who had not been present, he would ask, "Did you hear how I davened in the Beis HaMedrash?" He even went to the extent of tipping the attendant at the baths, so that he would say to the bathers, "Did you hear how wonderful Zalman Fishel davened the other day? If only we had more chazanim like him." The Jews of Daber Mizl looked on Zalman Fishel as something of a joke, and laughed either with him or at him. He had a way of getting on with people who found his light manner a pleasant change from the more serious side of life. He got on very well with his son-in-law Chaim Elia, and it must be admitted that he fussed over him as much as he did over himself. Baruch found he liked Chaim Elia incomparably more than he did Zalman Fishel. Chaim Elia was a very friendly soul, was nice to everybody, but the scholars in particular. He was a gentle-spoken person and had a very pleasant voice to listen to. In addition, he was fond of cracking jokes, and while he did not talk too much, he always managed to quote the sayings of our sages relevant to whatever was the topic. Because of his father-in-law, Zalman Fishel, Chaim Elia was often included in the laughter directed against the former, but Baruch was discerning enough to recognize and appreciate the many excellent traits in Chaim Elia, which a laughing matter and a peculiar father-in-law contrived to hide from the less understanding and therefore less interested people around him.